All right, so let's start with the big story that we are tracking on WION at this hour, and this, of course, has got to do with the tensions at the border between Russia and Ukraine, as the United States has put its head together with its European partners to plan what it describes as alternatives. Russia, interestingly, has knocked on the doors of the United States' arch-rival China. Now, President Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping are all set to sit down virtually for talks later in the day today. The Kremlin has confirmed that Ukraine border crisis is going to dominate the talks. The two leaders are also going to be discussing the United States and NATO's collective rhetoric, which has been branded as aggressive. This discussion, of course, comes 8 days after a video call that was held between the Russian and the American presidents.
В международных делах, особенно на европейском континенте, сейчас весьма и весьма напряженная. И, конечно, требует обсуждения между союзниками, между Москвой и Пекином. Весьма и весьма агрессивную риторику, как со стороны НАТО, так и со стороны Соединенных Штатов Америки. Это требует нашего с китайцами обсуждения.
Now, this partnership seems to build a counter to the G7 clan. Just over the weekend, the United States, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan and the United Kingdom had issued a statement condemning Russia's troop build-up along the Ukrainian border. It even warned that the alliance is ready with an alternative plan if Russia were not to back down. But Russia has chosen the strategic road. The country has cultivated closer ties with China as its relationship with the West has worsened. China shares a very long border with Russia, but the two countries have kept their focus on trade and energy sector. Just this year, China faced a significant coal shortage and Russia offered to help its neighbor. Now, when it comes to China, the two countries in fact stand on the Ukrainian border crisis is not very clear. At no point of time has Beijing spoken of in favor or against the Russian troop build-up. So it'll be very interesting to see as to what transpires when the two leaders, of course, meet in this virtual summit meeting. And now to give us more updates in terms of what can be expected when the two leaders of China and Russia, of course, meet, we're joined in by our correspondent Patrick Falk, who's joining us live from Beijing for more on this. Patrick, thank you very much indeed for joining us on this broadcast from WION. Now, just try help us understand, the significance of this meeting where President Vladimir Putin of Russia, at a time when he is under a lot of pressure from the West, he's meeting with the Chinese President Xi Jinping, who also does not share the best of relationship with the United States. What is likely to be discussed today?
Yeah, well, it's significant on a number of different levels, and I think you hit the nail on the head there. The question really is whether this is a matter of it being symbolically significant more, or are there real issues on the table between the two sides? I mean, the timing goes without saying. This is happening on the back of the US-led democracy summit. Of course, Russia and China weren't involved in that, and on the back of the Group of Seven condemning Russia for its military build-up on its border with the Ukraine, as you mentioned, as well as hitting out at China for what the G7 deemed coercive and economic trade practices. So this sends a very important signal of those strengthening relations between the two sides. But in terms of what's going to be discussed, the real substance that we're talking about here, reports are telling us here that they are going to be talking or reviewing bilateral relations between Beijing and Moscow. Remember, the two sides extended a 20-year cooperation and friendship treaty earlier this year. And no doubt they'll be discussing issues of trade and supporting one another economically, particularly after President Biden warned Russia of possible sanctions over the military build-up at the border with Ukraine. So, those things are of significance as well, and they will, as reports have said, be talking about issues of regional and international concern as well.
Right. At this point of time, a lot of people are looking at as to what is Beijing's stand likely to be on this crisis that is brewing along the border with Ukraine. At this point of time, have you been able to pick up anything at all in terms of what is Beijing's stand about Russia's troop build-up along the border with Ukraine?
No, there's been absolutely nothing here said on what Beijing's position is, and it's unlikely that China would weigh in. As China has said many, many times before, it does not want to interfere with other countries' affairs. But again, I think the importance here is that the two sides are meeting with one another. It is showing support for Moscow, you might say. And as I mentioned as well, President Biden warning of possible sanctions against Russia. I mean, this is an important indicator that China is prepared possibly to support Russia amidst this sort of threat from the US.
Right, and my last question to you is, at this point of time, do we know anything at all as to what Beijing brings to the table? Because the West, especially the United States, has been threatening Russia with crippling financial sanctions if it were to go ahead with any kind of attack on Ukraine. Will Beijing, has it anywhere shown an intention that what West may withdraw in terms of by imposing sanctions, Beijing would be willing to fill that void?
No, it hasn't. But, I mean, you mentioned yourself that China has undergone some very difficult issues related to energy here. So one would imagine there would be possible discussion about cooperation on power generation, gas and oil, as well as renewables as well. But, the thing that's also being talked about is, whether or not this relationship is one that's purely based on, growing pressure from Western countries on Moscow and Beijing. But I mean, one would have to say that the two countries certainly do have lots of areas of common interest, not least on the issue of Afghanistan, where both share security concerns and concerns or interests, if you like, on the redevelopment of the country. But, there are issues where the two countries do diverge as well. For instance, Russia is wary at least about recognizing the Taliban, and also Russia having growing security relations with India as well, in contrast with India's relationship with China right now.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed, Patrick Falk, for joining us and getting us all those insights. This, of course, is a meeting that will be watched very closely as President Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin, of course, meet over a virtual summit today. It'll be interesting to see as to what the outcome of that meeting will, of course, be. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.